This is part 2 of a 2-part video. The first part might be in the description if I remember to tell Miles to do that, and if I don't, that's my fault, but it'll still be on this channel, so you can check it out there. Alright, enjoy. Season 6's premiere episodes, Wake Up and Escape from the Citadel, in my opinion, are two of the best episodes in all of Adventure Time. I think Wake Up is a fantastic setup episode. I love the way it reintroduces Prismo and the Cosmic Owl. I love how it brings back the Lich. I love all the dark versions of Prismo that release from the old man. I love how Finn uses light to destroy them. I love how Prismo sacrifices himself so Finn can see his dad. And I love how abrupt that ending is. But the real star of the show here is the very next episode, Escape from the Citadel. Escape from the Citadel has got to be the darkest episode in all of Adventure Time, and I love it. The Lich is absolutely at his scariest in this episode. The speech he gives to Finn is haunting. It's not even exactly what he says, but it's the fact that Finn looks completely alone, like he's going to die, and the Lich just doesn't care. He doesn't care about human life or anything. He just wants to see the world burn. And the part where he starts growing flesh is really disturbing. I also love how awful of a person Finn's dad Martin is. It would have been so easy to just make him a cool guy, but no, he's pathetic. He doesn't treat his son with respect, and most importantly, he abandons him again, just like he did when Finn was a baby. But this time, Finn loses his arm in the process. I absolutely love the use of silence here. It makes the whole scene so much more impactful. And the way that Jake wraps his arm around Finn and tells him that it's going to be okay, that hits you. This is a reminder of everything Finn's father took from him. It is a physical representation of everything Finn has had to go through over the past 5 seasons. It is a consequence on going on adventures and permanent battle damage that Finn will have for the rest of his life. Ha! Breezy is an episode. I'm just gonna say it here. I think giving Finn his arm back was a terrible idea. Remember how I was just talking about the beauty of Finn losing his arm and what the loss of his arm represents? Well, nah, he just gets it back because of B-Lady, it's fine. I get that they only did this because Cartoon Network wanted Finn's character model to stay the same, but honestly, if that was the case, then they shouldn't have had Finn lose his arm in the first place. It would have taken a little bit of the emotional punch away from Escape from the Citadel, but hey, it prevents this stupid episode from happening. Aside from that, the episode is also oddly sexual, with Finn trying to kiss every princess in Ew, and like, they literally imply that he has sex with LSP, which, I mean, I don't think I needed that, thank you very much. But hey, it's not the worst episode of the season. No. That title belongs to none other than Waterpark Prank. Oh boy, do I hate this episode. It is my least favorite episode of the entire series. Where do we even start? How about with the art style? It looks hideous. It doesn't fit with the tone of Adventure Time, and all of the characters look constipated. Oh, and how about the characterization in this episode? Finn, Jake, and Ice King are so dumbed down, they make their Season 1 selves look more complex. Finn and Jake basically act like little kids in this episode, and Ice King is dumbed down to just simple villain. Basically, the plot of this episode is Finn and Jake trying to prank Ice King at a water park. That's about it. Not that there's anything wrong with the simple plot. I mean, Card Wars is a very simple episode, and it's one of my favorites. But like I already said, it makes Finn and Jake seem so much more immature than they usually do. Oh, and also there are these sad faces that make people sad. They show up at the beginning and the end of the episode, but they have no effect on the plot at all, and I honestly just think they're here to fill time. This is the worst episode of the entire series and drags the entire season down with it. It's a miserable excuse for an Adventure Time episode, and I hope I never watch it again. The fact that this is in the same season as Escape from the Citadel, well, I don't even know what to say about that. Okay, so what about the season as a whole? How good is it? Well, I don't think it's bad, but in terms of Adventure Time, it's very disappointing. I feel like the main problem with this season is its tone. While I praised seasons 3 and 4 for being able to balance the fun aspects of the show with the serious aspects of the show, this season kinda drops the ball on that. Even more so than season 5 did. I feel like there are a lot of episodes this season where I recognize that they're important to the story and the lore of the show, but they're just not very fun to watch. Like, I recognize that episodes like Orgolorg and On the Lam are important to the story, but I just never feel like rewatching them. And then there are episodes like Sad Face and Jake the Brick that aren't important to the story and also aren't fun or really interesting. They're just kind of boring. And I do think the show can have both. Simon and Marcy has a ton of lore and world building, and yet it's one of my favorite episodes because Simon and Marceline are just very likable characters. There's a good, interesting struggle with Simon trying to remain sane, and it's also pretty funny. It's not that there aren't any episodes I like this season, it's just that a good chunk of them I just don't feel like going back to. And it's a shame because there really is some good stuff this season. Like I said, the season premiere episodes are great, and I love episodes like The Tower, Germaine, and Is That You? But the season as a whole just isn't my favorite, to say the least. However, does season 7 improve on this season, or do things get worse from here? Let's find out. Okay, so season 7 is where things get kinda weird. So originally the season would have been 39 episodes, Bonnie and Nettie to reboot. But for some reason Cartoon Network changed the seasons around, so about a third of season 7 is actually season 8 now. About half of what was originally supposed to be season 8 is now season 9, and what was entirely season 9 is now season 10. I don't know why Cartoon Network did this, but for the purposes of this video, I will be going by the new episode order. Which means that season 7 is Bonnie and Nettie to the Thin Yellow Line, season 8 is Broke His Crown to the Light Cloud, season 9 is Orb to 3 Buckets, and season 10 is The Wild Hunt to Come Along With Me. In my opinion, season 7 is a major improvement upon season 6. And I think it works for similar reasons that seasons 3 and 4 work, in that it manages to be fun while still having a bunch of lore. Though I wouldn't call it a perfect season. Episodes like Cherry Cream Soda, Summer Showers, and Scamps don't really do it for me. Though thankfully, there are only a handful of episodes I consider meh this season, and none that I consider flat out bad. And the good stuff this season is really, really good. Episodes like Varmint, The More You Mow, The More You Know, and Crossover are real standouts this season. But the absolute highlight of this season has got to be the episode Hall of Egress. It's just such a cool concept, with Finn having to traverse a dungeon with his eyes closed, and then having to figure out how he'd be able to open his eyes without going back to the start. The episode has fantastic atmosphere, and despite being a complete one-off, it's one of the best stories Adventure Time has ever told. It's one of my favorite episodes of Adventure Time, and I highly recommend anyone check it out. even if you're not a fan of this series. Oh, and there's also the Stakes miniseries. This is the first of 3 miniseries in Adventure Time, and I think it's pretty great. It's nice to see that 7 seasons in, Adventure Time is still experimenting with new ideas. Adventure Time is many things, but repetitive, it is not. I like Stakes. I think it's really cool getting to see some of Marcy's past, and the vampire characters are also really cool. I really like some of their designs. Though I've gotta say, the one thing that really bugs me about this miniseries is its ending. Marceline getting her powers back and PB getting her kingdom back, to me, were resolved way too quickly. I'm not saying these changes had to last for the rest of the show, but at least seeing a few more episodes of Marcy without her powers and PB without her kingdom would have been cool in my opinion. Overall, I think I'd call Stakes my least favorite of the 3 Adventure Time miniseries, but that's not really saying much, as I think all 3 of them are very good. And I think the miniseries format works really well with Adventure Time. Honestly, I think that's how I'd describe Season 7 as a whole. It's not my favorite season of Adventure Time, but it's a very solid one nevertheless. And now, with Season 7 done, we can move on to Season 8. Season 8 is probably the most story-heavy season of the show, at least so far. Almost every episode this season features either story development or character development. But unlike with Season 6, it never really feels not fun. And I think that mostly has to do with the fact that most of these episodes still work very well as just one-off stories, just a part of an overall larger narrative. And I don't think this change is really out of place either. It feels like the show really worked up to this point. Each season got more and more dark and story-heavy than the last one, leading to this season being almost entirely story-heavy. Oh, and I haven't even gotten to the Islands miniseries yet. It comes at the very tail end of Season 8, and I just think it's fantastic. I love finally getting to see other humans on the show, finally getting to meet Finn's mom, and getting a backstory for Susan as well as sort of an end to her character arc. I'm so glad the Adventure Time team decided to do this. I think that the Islands miniseries is one of the best things Adventure Time has ever done. The only thing I'm not too crazy about when it comes to this miniseries is the second episode, Whipple the Happy Dragon. It's not a bad episode, it's just kinda boring, and it doesn't really add much to the overall story. But in return, the 6th episode, Min and Marty, is one of the best episodes in all of Adventure Time. It's one of the most beautifully told love stories I've ever seen. And finding out why Martin abandoned Finn as a baby just makes his character so much sadder. I absolutely adore this episode. It is incredible. Overall, Season 8 is one of Adventure Time's best, and I think it does a great job taking the series in a new direction. However, how well does Season 9 stay in that direction? Let's find out. Next to Season 10, Season 9 is the shortest season of the show, with only about 14 episodes. But that being said, I think it's pretty dang great. I think the season is even more story-heavy than Season 8, because every episode, with only one exception, has to do with the overall story. And I gotta say, I really like the story-heavy direction that Adventure Time has taken. And despite being super short, this season actually contains quite a few of my favorite episodes, and there aren't any episodes this season that I flat out dislike. My least favorite episode this season would probably be Fiona and Cake and Fiona. I don't think it's flat out bad, however, it's still a Fiona and Cake episode, so I'm just kinda meh on it. To be honest, I think I would call it my favorite Fiona and Cake episode, just because it's the one that has the least to do with Fiona and Cake. But, I don't know, I'm still pretty meh on this one. I like the beginning, and I think Ice King has a few good lines. However, the episode does this weird plot twist, where, like, it turns out Fiona and Cake was actually just a TV show, and it got beamed into Ice King's head, and, like, it doesn't make sense, and I don't get it. And also, how do Finn and Jake exist? Is that just a coincidence? I don't know, it's weird. Oh, and there's also the Elements miniseries. I think this is probably my favorite Adventure Time miniseries. I love the designs of the elementified versions of the kingdoms. We get some very strong character development for Betty, the character interactions are at their best, and we get a ton of lore. Islands gave me more of an emotional gut punch, but in terms of the story, I think Elements is the best Adventure Time miniseries. Plus, it contains my favorite episode of the season, and one of my favorites of the entire show, Cloudy. Much like what was missing in I Remember You, there's not too much adventuring that goes on in this episode, but I still think this episode is fantastic. Remember when I said this miniseries has great character interactions? Well, this episode shows it off better than any other episode of this miniseries. The way that Finn and Jake interact is both heartwarming, and it gives us some insight into how they feel about the situation. And it makes it even sadder when Jake eventually gets separated from the rest of the group. This episode almost reminds me of Free Churro from BoJack Horseman, though with 2 people, and it's a lot less cynical. Fun fact, this episode was actually supposed to be way back in Season 1, but I think it works better here as a part of the Elements miniseries. This episode is brilliant, and I'm so glad the Adventure Time team decided to do this. Though in terms of my favorites of the season, 3 Buckets really isn't far behind. I love the foreshadowing, I love the interactions between Finn and Fern, I love the fight between Finn and Fern, I love the ending. This episode is just great and a fantastic way to end the season. As a whole, Season 9 is a fantastic season, and one of my favorites of the show. Just about every episode of the season is strong in its own way, and it does a great job setting up the final season. But how well does Season 10 do in sending off one of Cartoon Network's best shows? Well, let's find out. Season 10 of Adventure Time focuses a bit less on the story, and more so on sending off the characters, as well as building up to the finale. Always BMO Closing is a send-off to BMO, Son of Rat Bear is a send-off to Flame Princess, Reign of Fire is a send-off to Tree Trunks, Hudson and Marcy is a send-off to Hudson Abadir, and First Investigation is a send-off to Joshua and Margaret. Although I enjoyed the story-heavy nature of Seasons 8 and 9, I don't really mind this change for Season 10. Adventure Time was always focused more on its characters than its story, so I think it's appropriate to make sure that those characters have a good send-off. Plus, there still are a decent amount of episodes that are focused on the story. About half the season is focused on sending off the characters, and the other half is focused on story like Seasons 8 and 9, which I'm perfectly fine with. But of course, we have to talk about this finale. The finale got kind of mixed reception as a whole, but for me personally, I loved this finale. I love how it's set up with Shermie and Beth, 2 characters from the future that we've never met before. Honestly, they're both such likable characters that I really wouldn't mind seeing a spin-off starring them. Despite not actually doing much, Gulb is one of the most threatening villains Adventure Time has ever had. I love how Ice King becomes Simon once again, and the fact that Betty has to sacrifice herself to keep him safe. And we get to see Marceline and Bubblegum kiss, which is super satisfying not because they're the same gender, but because we saw them grow together as the series progressed, and they're both such interesting and complex characters. I love Time Adventure and just how bittersweet it is. I love the usage of the credits song. And I love the ending montage showing off what each character is doing after the finale. We saw these characters grow and develop, and we grew and developed with them. And as a huge fan of the show, this was so satisfying to see. Honestly, I don't know if Adventure Time could have ended any better than this. I love this finale. It's intense, it's funny, it's satisfying, it's emotional. It just has everything I love about this show. And while I think I prefer Seasons 8 and 9, I think Season 10 was a great way to wrap up Adventure Time. So, Adventure Time. Did it rot, or was it rebirthed? Well, kinda both if I'm gonna be honest. There was a rough period in there during seasons 5 and 6, but thankfully the show was able to pull itself out of that in its 7th through 10th seasons. So you'd think I wouldn't give the show either. It didn't rot, but it wasn't quite rebirthed either, right? Wrong! You see, I only give the show neither when it didn't change much throughout its run, and Adventure Time changed a lot throughout its run. Some of the changes were for better, and some were for worse. But, in the end, I have to decide whether I think the show rotted or was rebirthed. But as a whole, I do think that Adventure Time was rebirthed. I don't necessarily think the later seasons were better than the earlier seasons, but I don't think they're necessarily worse either. Plus, the changes that were made, for the most part, I do like. It does have those weaker episodes in there, however, thankfully, those only take up a very small portion of the show. And the good stuff in Adventure Time towers above the good stuff in almost every other show I've ever seen. Let's see what some of the other members of the League of Incredible Critics have to say about whether or not Adventure Time got bad. Miles834 says no, there was only one bad season. Raiden says, I wouldn't say Adventure Time got bad, but seasons 5 and 6 were a lot more hit or miss type seasons than the ones that came before and the ones that came afterwards. I definitely agree with what Raiden said. I don't dislike seasons 5 and 6 of Adventure Time, they definitely have their great episodes. It's just that they also contain some of the weakest episodes of the series. Anyways, do you think Adventure Time got bad? Please tell me your thoughts on the show in the comments below, and thanks very much for watching. I put a lot of work into both this and part 1, and I really hope to cover more shows on Rot or Rebirth. And have a lovely day. Kirby, out.